Hello and welcome to episode number 110 of Daily Global Insights. Today is the 3rd of March 2021. I'm joined by Sridhar Chityalaji. Sridharji, welcome to PGurus channel. As always, it's a pleasure having you here, sir. Namaskar.
Namaskar and good morning to all.
Viewers, in the main points for today's news, how Florida got the COVID response right. The US imposes sanctions on Russia over Navalny poisoning. The US House lawmakers introduce a bill to end adoption of one China policy. $82 billion will be invested in port projects, according to Prime Minister Modi. And India and Iran are in talks to build a rail link between Chabahar port to Zahedan. This is going to have a lot of implications. Let's first start with the US news. Florida got it right. The other lockdown states got it wrong. Why do you say so?
Well, I think that Rick Santos gave a wonderful explanation as to why he got it right. He got it right because you can see that he has been able to coordinate and control the vaccines. It has got the lowest unemployment rate. It has got more in-person education going on in the state. He has opened the businesses. Florida is back to business. There's a lot of companies moving, including banks moving to Florida. He has made the state very business conducive rather than more socialistic in terms of the principles. Vaccination program, he has more people vaccinated who are older than 65, which is currently the target around the country. So he is, quite a lowest mortality rate, low unemployment, high per capita relative to many of the states. So he says, I got this right. He has now also come up with introduced a principle to deal with this undue influence that CCP exerts in many of the states. We saw it in Texas, we have seen it in California, we have seen it in many of the large, very critical states, and Florida is a critical state. So he's come up with a law which says that any CCP type influence will be dealt with appropriately at the state level.
Now, you made a fairly significant observation that the Chinese Communist Party is indulging or interfering in the affairs of various states of United States. Is this something that is a recent phenomenon, or has it been happening for a long time?
I think this is going on since the great Biden-Obama years. It didn't stop. The Trump administration only began to pick it up during almost the fag end of their term, and they began to realize it on three fronts. One, they saw profound influence through endowments in the education. A number between $4.5 to $8 billion was invested by the CCP into the colleges, into the top colleges like Harvard, MIT, Yale, and so on. They also found that there was a close collaboration on the research front going on between some of the schools and the universities in China. They also found that many government officials were compromised. The names of the Georgia governor came up. Obviously California and some of the other important influential members came up as potentially compromised. Of course, needless to say, some of the Democratic leaders in the elections. So these, both on the COVID side, on the education side, influencing through capital injection into some of the states through setting up industries, which were directly feeding into Chinese aspirations. And one after the other during the fag end of the term, Trump was trying to impose sanctions on many of these companies.
The Congress is trying to pass a new bill called the HR1 bill. And the first read indicates setting off some alarm bells. Can you explain a little bit about what this bill is all about and what seems to be the ultimate aim of this bill, sir?
Yeah, House Resolution 1, which is around, if you want to be very sarcastic or hypocritical, then you can say it is a way by which the Democrats want to control the conduct of the elections, weaning away from the agreed principle of the state legislatures in each of the states owning and managing the process and the conduct of the elections. The HR1 Act would give the federal government right over the election process, mandates on what can happen within the states, also around the eligibility of the people who can vote, and the type of meetings and the type of campaigns that is permitted within those states, and who can participate in those campaigns. Also on the whole notion of the voter registration, voter ID, as well as this most controversial absentee ballots. So effectively, they're saying we at the center will determine how exactly we will phrase and change the rules and conduct the elections in each of the states, taking the law away from the state legislatures. This is one way to say we control the agenda. We saw that in many of the states, what we witnessed around the absentee ballots, what we witnessed around the postal ballots, and what we also witnessed around the Twitters, the tech platforms exerting their overt control over blocking, including the president of the country, blocking their views and blocking their campaigns, saying it's a political interference. So they have experimented with this quite well, and they feel that this is the time to introduce so they can control effectively the whole process. Now, when you look at the immigration process currently at play, the illegal aliens are at a harmonization process. Then we are going to have zero tolerance to complete tolerance and decriminalization of the borders. So you could have a whole swag of people coming in who are compassionate because they've been allowed to come in and become part of the community. And this process may even legitimize those guys voting in the elections. And which is why the Republicans are calling foul, and they have come up with their own alternate model, which is more around preserving election integrity, allowing the process to be constitutionally within the state legislatures, and consistency and title control over this whole mail ballot reform.
Sir, regarding the January 6th riots, the FBI appears to be sending some confusing messages. On the one side, they are saying that Antifa is not, the footprint of Antifa and other such similar organizations is not there. And on the other side, they are saying something else. It's a little confusing when I read all the messages together. What do you make of it, Christopher Wray's statements about FBI?
Exactly same as you. Is like a politician. FBI director is acting like a politician. Well, the January 6 riots was a result of domestic terrorist groups. By the way, no group which is potentially the target is a terrorist group, including KKK. I won't call them as terrorist group. So therefore, who is a terrorist group? To be determined. Do we know the cause of the death of the Brian Schicknick? No, we don't. We know that he was beaten up with a fire extinguisher and he kind of succumbed, but we don't know what it is. The investigation is still on. So in summary, FBI director is behaving like a true politician. There was an intense debate between him and Lindsey Graham today in the Senate on the whole January 6th Capitol Hill riots, as well as what was the causes, etc. So they say that individual people may have acted. And in fact, he went on to say, it may be an Antifa pretendee, or it may be a fake Trump supporter who calls himself. So he remained neutral across all sides of the fence. So we actually don't know what the truth is.
In stimulus news, the Democrats are pushing Biden to have a periodic stimulus, like more than one, automatically happen. The first one, the House has already passed the bill, and it looks like $1,400 checks per person in a family are headed down to the United States citizen. But what is this recurring payments, and how realistic is that?
Now, we'll touch on this when we get a little bit down the track into the markets, but let me give you a direct answer. What we were witnessing is three specific programs. We touched on this immigration or the open border policy that the Biden administration has adopted with such a frenzy through an executive order. What is going on in this particular phase is that they've already done this for the children. You remember, you have a 3,000, you have a 3,600 child tax credits. So this is going to be a recurring payment going into each of the families. Imagine if you have 6 kids or 4 kids, what the payouts would look like. The second is, what they're saying is, this COVID situation could be, you know, prevalent for a long period of time. So we will enact a bill whereby this $600 or $1,400 or $2,000 becomes a recurring payment. We implement it, and at will we can take it out. The whole target for them is this 9 million whom they believe are, below poverty line, 12 million illegal aliens, who don't have a formal mechanism of receiving unemployment benefits. And then you have these new incumbents who are going to be coming into the mainstream America, and you need a funding model. What we are witnessing is the socialization of the US economic, which is almost a surreptitious social security benefit program, pre-retirement for every member of the family whom they think that they require this money. Okay, that's the second. The third, we already covered this yesterday, which is we will have a 2% tax for those who have a household wealth of 50 million to 1 billion, and then those who are above 1 billion will have 3%. Oh, by the way, Ms. Warren says, and Ms. J. Paul says, oh, this is fair. It's fair to have this. So therefore, it only means that those other people can be funded through this particular receipts that we get out of this. So these 3 points point out they are surreptitiously creeping into socializing the economy and the distribution of wealth without any kind of earnings.
In global news, Nigeria's hybrid threat of terrorists allied with bandits is posing new problems and a new type of threat that stares at nations in the African subcontinent. Myanmar police fires tear gas and rubber bullets at protestants. So the protesters are still out on the streets in Myanmar, and we have to see how that plays out. The United States imposes sanctions on Russia over Navalny poisoning, and the US House lawmakers introduce bill to end adoption of one China policy. This is a significant thing. This has been talked about for a long time, but looks like now the United States is getting serious about this. So I'd like you to comment together about all these four things.
First, and on the Nigeria side, the Boko Haram is back in action. They were silent during the Trump phase. Now they're back in action. They abducted 300 school kids. It looks like quite a few of them are back, but they have been formally converted into the Islamic faith and become historically, the story is they become the slaves for these fighters and submit themselves to that agenda and the cause. Now, the point is that there has also been, Nigeria is a oil-rich nation to the extent of, when I say use the word oil-rich, I mean it is an oil economy. So there's been lots of kidnappings and so on and so forth. There seems to be a seamless confluence, and that is causing a problem. They don't know whether it is actually Boko Haram or these bandits who are engaged in this process. This is a problem that Nigeria faces. By the way, Nigeria is not part of the Black Lives Matter. Black lives do not matter seems to be the policy as far as Nigeria, Sudan, and some of the African nations are concerned, because these things don't appear to be part of the agenda of normalizing the lives of people. As far as the second point that you have raised is around the one China policy. Well, we had one Tibet, one Tibet kind of policy, which is our Tibet independence policy. And Taiwan has now emerged. Hong Kong is gone. That's the other nation, what you call independent region. That is, Hong Kong is no longer in contention. Taiwan has become a red flag. So many of the Asian allies, such as Korea, Vietnam, Japan, even possibly ASEAN, have made it very clear that Taiwan is a red flag if China makes an incursion into Taiwan. And so US has woken up to it while they lost the South China Sea and Spratly Islands and all kinds of little areas around that nine dotted line. As far as Taiwan is concerned, every nation has raised a red flag. In fact, there's a report from the US Army as part of the US Defense Forces and US Army that 2022 could be a very difficult year for Taiwan, and China may make an attempt to forcibly take over Taiwan for two reasons. One, by then the 2021 Winter Olympics is over. Two, it coincides with this biannual Communist Party gathering or Congress, and it may be, rah, 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 especially Xi Jinping is facing some internal kind of challenges within the CCP party. So they're raising the red flags. Whether the US is organized and geared, we don't know.
There has been a surge of Chinese incursions into the area surrounding the Senkaku Islands, with Japan which are part of Japan, and now Japanese are scrambling to try and see how they can protect these. What is the significance of the Senkaku Islands? Is there any energy deposits, or what exactly is the significance? These are the tiny, tiny, small islands there.
Well, I think that there are two important elements. One element is Chinese, one more, what I call as might is right. We have taken over a Japanese kind of a little fishing island. It's also a strategic location in terms of Taiwan Straits from an observation and from navigation. It wants to have clear passage around the Taiwan Straits, both on the maritime side as well as on the air. So Senkaku is an observation post, in addition to being a fisheries island, in addition to being a strategic outpost for the Japanese. So therefore, I think that is why it is important for them, not only this island, but also there is a small tip which is further ahead, which is in the Taiwanese sovereign jurisdiction, and that is also being targeted by the Chinese, so that they have seamless kind of maritime and air access.
Prime Minister Modi has said that India would be allotting about $82 billion in port-based projects, and the Power Ministry in India confirms that China-backed hackers targeted the power centers in India and all the attacks were thwarted. We had a detailed session on this on episode 109. Were all the attacks thwarted? We think not. And there was an outage on October 13th, 2020, I believe, in Mumbai that lasted up to 10 hours. I think that was, I could be, we could be wrong, but we think that that was indeed a successful attempt on part of the Chinese attacking group to do this thing. So we have to wait and see why India is denying it. Perhaps they don't want, accepting that would mean that they are vulnerable. So we can understand that. So do you have anything to add to that, sir?
No, I think that what just that points out is at least the ministry has come out and acknowledged that there was the attacks from the Sugar Panda, which is the code name for that specific group, which was targeting our infrastructure.
So you heard it here first about all the details. We've been hearing about this bits and pieces, but we in episode 109 showed you a map of India, which were the different places where the attacks were done. We have even more information, but I think in the interest of confidentiality, we're not going to reveal that part. Let's move on to the next thing, sir. The Pakistan and Turkey are planning to have a rail link that will join Istanbul with Islamabad through Zahedan in Iran. I'm going to try and put up the map here, sir. Just one second. Okay, so you have the map up there now. So we have what is Istanbul all the way across Syria, Iraq, Iran, and all the way up to Zahedan, which is what you can see as my finger, my mouse points. This is the arrow pin that is dropped. That is Zahedan. Zahedan sits at a point where Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan meet. So it's a very critical point. And this rail line is going to join Istanbul to Islamabad through this. Any thoughts, sir? Do you think this is a feasible project?
It's a feasible project. This is one of the projects that we discussed will become part of the Belt Road Initiative, if we recall, rail link between Turkey and Pakistan and via Iran. But what is strategic from the perspective of Indian interest is concerned? India wanted to have a link between Chabar and the Zahedan. Right. It is almost equidistant from between Kabul to this point, and then from the port to Zahedan. So it looks like both of them want to get through that point, potentially creating a logistical nightmare. It is conceivable. It remains to be seen how this develops. When you actually take a look at that map, take a look at the map.
Yeah.
I'm getting it closer. So when you take a look at the map.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. When you take a look at the map, one would observe that you can almost divide the West Asian region and the African region as one block, and this entire Central Asian region, comprising of starting from the west of Pakistan into Afghanistan, Iran, and going all the way to northwest towards, as you rightly pointed out, Iraq, Syria, and into Turkey as another block. So is it conceivable that the phenomenal policy work done by Trump administration to insulate Qatar and make them reunite with the GCC countries, it's a master policy to insulate that piece, and you will observe that potentially India will inch towards the West Asia, which they already do, and then into Djibouti and Gulf of Aden, into the territories of Yemen and so on, and recognizing that there could be potential conflicts because of the Chinese, Iranian, Turkish kind of a link, Pakistani link in that central bloc. So it's a looming trouble, but I think India has organized itself reasonably well from a strategic point of view. And the Trump and Mike Pompeo's policy of forming that West Asian bloc and having a peace accord with Israel augurs well. Because should there be an attack from Israel, it will be in that central region, which is around Tehran, rather than in the West Asian.
And we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Sir, let's take a look at the markets now. In fact, before that, let's take a look at COVID. Merck, a rival of J&J, is also going to produce J&J's vaccine. So this is a rare situation where the rivals are cooperating together to bring out vaccines quickly.
Indeed, I think it's a great move. President Biden today announced this development is going to help vaccinating all of United States by end of May. If you recall, yesterday we had talked about the vaccination program, the entire vaccination program in the United States concluding by November 20th and 70% by September 20th. Now, if they can advance it to end of May, that would be a tremendous kind of boost to lot of economic activity as well as general disposition towards managing this COVID. That will also augur well for rest of the world, as this practice can now be extended, or this vaccine can now be extended to all parts of the world, and a single dose is a phenomenal outcome in terms of the general management of COVID is concerned.
Yes, indeed. I couldn't agree with you more there. In markets.
So let me do a quick market summary. The markets were down after a surging progress on March 1st. Today, the markets were down. Dow was down by about 150 points. S&P was down by about 32 points. A market took a breather. Here's important data. The oil went down further by about 15-20 cents. It's below 60. It's at 59.47. And the 10-year bonds dropped as well from 1.4 by about 5 basis points, or 20 basis points to about 1. Not 20 basis, about 10 basis points to about 1.398. The 30-year Treasury also dropped to about 2.19%. But here's the most important data that I want to touch on. One is now the economic growth for the first quarter is being targeted at 10%, 10% by the Fed tracker. I'm not talking about the financial institutions and brokers analysts. Fed is tracking at 10% first quarter. Why? Very simple. Manufacturing has risen and it is at its highest since 2018. There's a slow rise in prices and the inventories are choked because the demand has grown. Though employment remains weak, but there are some green spots as the economy opens, and this is where the COVID and mass vaccination before the end of May takes a very significant kind of a step forward. But the financial data that backs all this is the personal income surged 10% in January, potentially an outlier as a result of the $600 checks from the stimulus that went out. Then the second important data point is the wealth, personal wealth, household wealth increased by $2 trillion, $2 trillion. And the spending was just 2.4% because we were coming off a last quarter kind of a spending rise. Now, the last data point is personal savings, which was captured in the surveys, is at an all-time high of nearly $4 trillion, personal savings of the individuals. The individuals during the surveys had pointed out they would not be spending the stimulus money, they would be saving it. Now, this raises the question, which is what the Republicans have been saying. One, the household wealth is high, personal savings high, income has surged. This is before the $1,400 is sent out, and this is also prior to the so-called ill-conceived recurring payments program kicks in. If that is the case, why do you actually need a stimulus and take this country into deeper debt with another $2 trillion to be added to all the kind of the favored programs of Mr. Biden, supported by Janet Yellen? So there are some fundamental questions that is arising when you actually look at the personal household data and personal household wealth. And lastly, the V-shaped recovery worked, and the V-shaped recovery that we have been talking about, we have given enough data. That is to the first stimulus that was applied, 2.1 trillion, and the subsequent 900 billion is more than adequate. All you need is a smaller stimulus targeted at some small businesses as well as some important segments of the economy. So that's my kind of take on markets, but I will kind of pass it back to you for any question.
Thank you very much, sir. Is there any way that the government can stop this from happening? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any way that
no, I think the train has left the station.
That's what I thought. And viewers, we had a little bit of technical glitches here today again. It is just the fact that at sometimes the internet traffic is quite high and that can cause some glitches. But I think we have ridden through most of it. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back as always at the same time, same channel. Namaskar. Thank you very much, Sridharji.
Namaskar and have a good day.